Well, hey, my name's Matt Steen. I'm the co-founder of Chemistry Staffing, and this is another chemistry conversation. So I'm excited today because joining me is Dan Navarra. So Dan is one of our church coaches. He's a guy that goes and helps churches find youth pastors, worship pastors, all sorts of people. He's been serving with us for, 18 months, 2 years now, Dan?
Yep, couple years
now. Before that, he's got about 15 years in youth ministry. And one of the things that he's done, I guess going on 4 years now, is a nationwide salary survey or compensation survey for youth pastors. And this is one of those things that's kind of it's something that really, we've got other organizations that are doing full church staff compensation surveys, but this one is really focused on youth pastors and has gotten great data for the last 4 years. So we're excited because Dan this week is releasing the data from this year's, and I think there's some really cool things that'll help some of our churches just understand how to what the trends are right now. So Dan, thanks for taking some time to talk, man.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt. I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in. So you've done this survey. You had probably about 1,000 people, give or take, from across the country, different situations that participated in this year. What's the biggest trends that you're seeing coming out of the data this year?
Well, everybody's always interested in what the big number is, like what's the average salary of a youth pastor, and we'll get to that in a second, but I like to stack them year over year. And so last year we saw a 2.5% increase. This year we're seeing a 2.1% increase in the national average of a youth pastor. And that brings the big giant number to nationally $48,938 in annual salary only. That's not including benefits. That's just salary in 2021.
Okay, so 48,938, and that's nationwide average. Now, before we started talking, you had mentioned that sometimes California might be a little bit higher. Can you talk a little bit about California and what some of our churches there need to know?
Yeah, so California is its own special thing, and if you're in California, you know that. California's compensation ranks 16% higher than the national average. Okay, and
why is that?
Second. Well, it's because of the wage laws here, right? So California has this year a tiered minimum wage of $13 an hour and $14 an hour. If your church has 25 or more employees, you're at $14 an hour. Now, the problem is there's a salary exemption law in California where you must be paid double the minimum wage. So if your church, say you have 25 employees, that's $14 an hour times 2 to double it to $28 an hour times 52 weeks a year times 40 hours a week. That number, I mean, it's high. It comes out at $58,240.
Yeah.
And so California is in its own planet, but what's interesting about this year's data is California's compensation didn't really change the average numbers. It stayed pretty similar. And what that means is the other 49 states, even though the national increase is 2.1%, California didn't anchor it like it did a year ago with a 5% increase. Yeah. So nationally, we actually see more like 3.5% of an increase in the average salary of the other 49 states.
That's cool. And I think that's kind of important to mention. So California has this minimum number, this minimum threshold number for exempt status. And I think nationwide, I think what's amazing to me is, for most states, that minimum exempt number is somewhere around 36. And then you have, this huge number in California, which fascinating, and how all that works, but that's not why people are here to kind of listen to us. I guess is us. Want to hear us rail against governments. There's enough people doing that this week. So increase of 2.1% average across. The big number, is the national average is about 48,938. Talk to me a little bit. What as you've done this over the last 4 years. What are the biggest factors that you see that are affecting compensation?
Okay, and for youth pastors specifically, it's the last 4 years at least, it's always been this. Tenure and education are the two biggest factors that speak to the compensation package of a youth pastor. And so My numbers year over year have proven correct. Your college degree is worth about a 5% bump. If you and Jim are applying for the same job and you have a degree and they don't, 5% more probably for the person with a degree, and then a seminary degree bumps it like another 15 or 16%.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so there's a big pay disparity. And in my data, over a third of youth pastors now have completed a master's. And
Wow.
so the space is getting incredibly competitive. Whereas, a decade or two ago, there wasn't a lot of youth ministry majors out there. There just wasn't a huge market for it yet. And now we're seeing very specialized training at a collegiate and master's level. And so you're seeing that start to affect compensation.
Gotcha. And so you said tenure as well. Is there a sweet spot, for somebody tenure wise?
There is. So the magic number is 5 years. And if you've ever been a youth pastor and you've looked on job boards, you see this all the time. Churches want 3 to 5 years of paid experience as a youth pastor. They want somebody who's done it before. I get it. The issue that we're seeing is at the 5-year mark, we're seeing a giant pay bump, like over 10% pay bump in youth pastors. And what my data suggests is it's not because churches are giving big raises in year 10 or year 5. It's because that youth pastor with that 3 to 5 years experience is taking their second job down the road at another church. And that church is willing to pay about 10% more than what their current church is paying because of the combination of education and experience.
Gotcha. So there's something to be said for some cost of living and some merit-based pay increases along the line when it comes to stability in that ministry almost.
For sure. You could literally piece it together like this. If I did 2% every year, that's a little bit less than $1,000, right? But over 5 years, that's a 10% raise. And that makes your compensation package for a youth pastor extremely competitive. Yeah. And then you've eliminated a lot of the factors of people saying, hey, maybe I should look at another role down the street. And that's at a relatively low cost.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's great. So you also saw a little bit of a difference in how it played out gender, based on gender, right? So men, women getting paid slightly different. Talk a little bit about that.
So last year's report had a deep dive on gender, so I'm not going to do a big umbrella on that. The link for the last year's survey is in this year's survey if you want to do a deep dive on that. But what it suggests is the gender wage gap is still there for sure. Men in 2020 saw a 2.5% increase in their compensation across the board. Women stayed within $100, and so the female number didn't budge barely at all this last year, and that just tells me that it's still something that we haven't solved all the way. Last year, I pointed to some good findings of things that were pointing to a more balanced pay, and we're still making progress in that, but we have a long way to go.
Cool. Very cool. So talk to me, this year you did something a little bit different. You started to look at people's Enneagram and compensation, all that kind of stuff. Tell me a little bit about what you learned there.
Okay, so the Enneagram, the 9 types, I thought it'd be interesting to see how compensation and Enneagram number are correlated. And it didn't really surprise me a ton, but I think it still bears communicating. So the 3 highest earning numbers are a 3, a 7, and an 8. And if you know the Enneagram, that probably doesn't surprise you based on who those people are, just kind of what they are all about. The lowest earners were the 4 and the 6. And in the survey, I talk about specifically the 6 and why the 6 might stay in a role a little bit longer than they should because they have these loyal tendencies and things like that. It was a pretty significant pay gap. Now, but here's the thing about the Enneagram that I think surprised me the most. When we did the survey, almost a third of the respondents reported not knowing their Enneagram number, or at least being able to say, here's the one I think I am. Yeah. And that the average salary of those people who did not know ranked as the 3rd lowest. If we were to add a 10th number, and that would be the 10th number, they were the 3rd lowest. And so I think to me, it points to one of the things that you can do to help yourself when it comes to compensation as a youth pastor is just simply know yourself. Like know who you are and what your shadow sides are so that you can speak up. But also, for churches that are hiring, to understand that there's youth pastors out there that are very driven, and with that comes accomplishments, and usually accomplishments are the things that look good on payroll. And so just kind of understanding that and knowing that really helps you understand who your staff are and how you can best serve them. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. And it's always good to be able to take that and be able to shape how you lead your crowd. So we're running out of time. Want to honor your time, but one of the things that we've seen over the course of this last year is, there's a whole awful lot of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
We've been through, the apocalypse. We've seen everything that went on over the summer. We've seen everything that's going on politically, and nobody has any idea which, rider of the apocalypse is going to show up next. And so with that in mind, we're seeing a lot of churches who are saying, hey, I don't know if I can do this 2% or 3% bump for my youth worker this year, because frankly, nobody on our team is getting a raise, because we need to see, what our giving is going to be come the end of first quarter, end of second quarter. To those churches, I mean, how would you advise them to care for their youth pastor if giving a salary increase this year just isn't in the cards?
Yeah, we've all been there, so I get that. So if you can't do it on the dollar side, which is fine, like you just can't do it every year. I understand that. There's a bunch of things you can do, simple things. I mean, what does it look like to maybe give them an extra few days of vacation, paid vacation this year? What does it look like to find somebody from the church who's got a cabin or a beach house or a lake house or something? Hey, will they donate it for a weekend or for a week? Send them on a marriage retreat, or send them to a conference or something like that, because that's a different pocket in the budget sometimes. And then, one of the things that you can do that's maybe even a little bit better for certain types of youth pastors is, on their work anniversary, can you recognize them in front of the church? Hey, Jim's been here 5 years and Susie's been here 7 years, and we just want to honor them. When you give them a round of applause, let's pray a blessing over their next 5 and 7 years.
Yeah.
Having the church write letters and say how grateful they are for their contribution to that youth pastor. I think that kind of validation and appreciation goes a long way when dollars can't do that. And not to say dollars take the spot of that, but I think it's a combination of all those things that'll help you keep your youth pastor in place in a healthy fit.
Yeah, definitely those things you need to be doing, not just when you can't give raises, but absolutely. That's,
right.
Being able to make sure everybody, recognizes the contribution that they're making. That just helps for a healthy team in general. So Dan, thank you so much for the work that you're doing with our churches at Chemistry, and also the work that you've done on this survey. I think this is a really helpful tool. We'll have the links down below for everybody to be able to access that and be able to kind of dig in a little bit more, and also information to be able to connect with Dan if you want to have further conversations about this. Dan, thank you.
Yeah, happy to help anytime. Send me an email.
Great.